1:40, and I would like to call the meeting to order. I am Dee Parker, speech-language pathologist and board chair.
Well, the board members can introduce themselves.
Marcia Raggier, audiologist, board member.
I'm not sure live here, a dispenser board member.
Debbie Snow, public board member.
I speech language pathologist, board member.
Allison Grimes, audiologist, board member.
Paul Sanchez, board executive officer.
Sabina Knight, legal counsel.
If anyone in the audience would like to introduce themselves, please come up to where one of the microphones is.
I'm Dennis Van Vliet, audiologist.
Vanessa Kahina on behalf of the Hearing Healthcare Providers of California.
Hello, Fogel, speech language pathologist and president of California Speech Language Hearing Association. You probably could have heard me better without it. Tony Berry, a consumer. Thank you. Brianne Humphreys. Well, Brianne Humphreys, I am the operations manager for the board.
Karen Robinson, board staff.
Thank you. At this time, is there any public item that someone would like to bring forth? We can't discuss it, but if you would like to let us know, please come forward. If not, we'll review the minutes. I do apologize for my voice. I sat in air conditioning yesterday and it tanked.
And I don't know if everyone checked their email, but this time around what we're trying to do is get these minutes done ahead of time and give you an opportunity to review them in advance so we have a more refined document for the board meeting. If you have any grammatical or minor edits, you can get those, you can submit those to Brianne. Otherwise, if you have any other changes, please let us know. Right here.
So I don't have any changes for them. Are we doing them one at a time, May 1st and then August?
Yes.
Okay, I don't have any changes for May, but I do have changes for August.
Just in general, I think we should avoid first person pronouns, just they're sort of awkward. So things like we, but actually on page 3, Mr. Sanchez reported the next practical exam, the board commented. I wonder if we need to explain a little bit more carefully what the board commented on, or does that stand alone? It just wasn't clear to me what the comment was. And I would like to appreciate whoever wrote these minutes on page 7 for commenting, thanking me for my work as board chair for so many years. And I can't decide if that was a compliment or a backhanded, yeah.
Allison, the first comment you made regarding the exam, what page is that?
Page 3. Under item D, the practical examination report. It's just not
I see,
very,
I see, okay.
And what about the pass-fail rate? Was it too high, too low? Was the proportion skewed? If we went to the trouble to comment, the interested reader might want to know if we had concerns.
I think we have the common concern every time with the fact that there's so few people that these large numbers, like 50% failure rate, sounds terrible, but that only 2 people took it. And one passed, one failed. That I think is probably what we were talking about, but I'm not positive, but I think so.
I think you're probably right. I guess if it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that part of the reason that we edit the minutes and review them is to make sure that if somebody were interested in what happened at last year's board meeting, they would be able to grasp sort of what the issues were. And so I read it with that idea in mind.
That's correct. I will verify. I believe this was a comment on the high pass rate of that particular report, but I can verify that.
That'd be great.
I have a comment. Just take that
Still on the May 12th, looking at number 11 on page 5, it says, I think it's sentence 1, purchased at retail places of business for mild hearing loss, and the law actually says mild moderate.
Is that on page
5,
Of the first
number 11?
of August 11th.
No, it's on the May 12th minutes.
Mild
Under
to
item
moderate,
number
yes.
11.
Yeah. Oh, I jumped ahead one, sorry.
So it said, Ms. Grimes provided a brief overview of the FTC hearing on over-the-counter hearing aids, which looked at the pros and cons of hearing aids being purchased at retail places of business for mild hearing loss. But it's really mild, moderate hearing
Yes.
loss. Because the next sentence jumps to severe.
Right.
We can go to August.
I have a comment about this 11. It says at the end that audiologists and hearing aid dispenser will be able to sell both over-the-counter hearing aids and hearing aids geared towards those with more severe hearing aids. But I think that audiologists and hearing aid dispenser will be able to sell everything, not just the more severe. The whole line, mild to the whole thing.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the page number and the item number. I apologize.
That's the same under the May 12th
Oh, under
minutes,
the-
page
okay.
5, item 11. I don't know if you took this from the language of the bill that suggests that audiologists and hearing aid dispensers were going to be looking more at severe losses, or if that was just a logical leap. Because Amnon's right, they're going to fit any level of hearing loss.
I think it's just the way whoever, I don't know who wrote these minutes, if it was, I think what, well, you can tell us what you're thinking, but I think you were just thinking that over-the-counter hearing loss, over-the-counter is for mild to moderate and the others are for more severe. But that's not necessarily the right conclusion because the regular hearing aids could also be
Yes,
for
it
everyone.
has.
Okay.
So if we can just, change it as he stated.
What would be a good term to use for the second category, over-the-counter and?
Hearing aids for all degrees of hearing loss, all types and degrees of hearing loss.
If you want to be more specific, you can add custom hearing aids. Because you cannot, over-the-counter, cannot sell custom-made hearing aids.
That is true.
Are the comments complete for the May minutes? And we'll move to August.
So for the August minutes, oops, couple. So looking at item 5 on page 2, and it's entitled Update from Speech Language Pathology Practice Committee. So it appears that these August 10th to 11 minutes, when they actually were written after the August 28th Speech Language Pathology Practice Committee meeting. So what's ended up happening is that the update is written as if the August 28th meeting already happened, even though the minutes are for August 10th and 11th.
I see.
So I think what we need to do is, and plus there's a little bit of a comment in here as well, but I think we need to keep the information about the August 28th meeting in the as it will happen, not as it already happened. So, for example, on the second line, meetings that were held on August 1st, 2017 and will be held on August 28th, 2017. And those are the comments that I have going all the way down. So on line 1, 2, 3, 4 of item 5, so Ms. Solomon Rice informed the board that for the August 28, 2017 meeting, staff will compile a list of statutes and regulations. And then the very next line, regulations pertaining to SLIPA and a list of statutes and regulations pertaining to speech language pathology assistance, and provide, rather than provided, a summary of them. The next line says Delta College will present, and I think you should include the person's name in there because you have another person's name on the next line. So it should be Susan Kidwell, S-U-S-A-N, and then Kidwell, K-I-D-W-E-L-L, will present a SLIPA program application. And then on the next line, Christina Jacques, I mispronounce her name, Christina Jacques, I think it is, with American River College, will gather required curriculum. And then on the second to last line, guidelines 1996, and summarizing the regulations to the committee meeting that is scheduled, that will, let's put it, that will occur on August 28, 2017 and October 9, 2017. I realize those are grammatical changes, but there's sort of there's a reason for those grammatical changes. And then I had one other change. On page 5, under item 13, discussion regarding the provision of telehealth services within the parameters of the Licensure Act and Business and Professions Code 2290.5. The second paragraph, the first sentence isn't quite accurate, so I think we need to make it accurate. Ms. Solomon Rice noted that schools, it should be not provide speech language services on a large scale. It should be that schools are the largest providers of telehealth speech language pathology services, and then cross out that whole on a large scale by electronic means, partially due to the shortage of SLPs in rural areas. So I'll just say that again. So what it should read is, Ms. Solomon Rice noted that schools are the largest providers of telehealth SLP services, partially due to the shortage of SLPs in rural areas. Okay, that would be it.
I have one of those concerns, like Allison mentioned before. This is item number 7 on page 3. Excuse me, it's item number 6. The last sentence says, the committee will look for reference materials and determine what can be removed from the fact sheet, following this issue that Vanessa brought up about whether would it be against the law not to mention T-coils and hearing aids that don't have them. And then this last sentence, I don't know, it's one of those vague things that if I look back at this later, I would know what you were talking about. And nor do I recall what we were considering removing from the fact sheet. So maybe I have to go back and listen to it again, and
Sure.
unless somebody remembers.
I think we will have to go back and take a look at these and bring it back.
Okay, under number 11, the same, next page 4, it says, Ms. Grimes spoke on the continuing problems audiologists face working with CCS and presented a document Ms. Grimes and Ms. Ratcher worked on. It's actually Ms. Grimes and Ms. Vignier who worked on it. I didn't work on it. Vingea. The next paragraph says, Silvio Ferrari and Nick Brokaw with Sacramento Advocates offer to assist the board with solutions to engage the agencies in conversation and lobby for statutory revisions. The agencies, I'm not sure who you're talking about. As far as I know, it was the Department of Healthcare Services that were talking about. And you don't have one in about grammatical things. It's just this one.
I think that's.
I thought they were really well done.
Actually, I think it's useful. Thank you.
Okay, under number 13, the last paragraph says, and finding a balancing between accessibility. And forgive me for being not following this well, but number 16, there's a list of different legislation, pieces of legislation, and possible, it says legislative update review and possible action, and then it says motion to write a letter of support. And I couldn't associate that statement with which one of those, or all of them, or what's it referring to?
I think that's just a formatting issue. It's under letter E.
Oh, so it just means E?
Yes.
Okay.
If there are no more edits, no motion is necessary, we will work on these minutes and bring them back.
Okay. So these will be reviewed and we'll bring them back again in February.
Yes.
Item number 4 is an update on the Speech Language Pathology Practice Committee, and that will be presented by Patty Solomon-Rice.
Great, thank you. So we've had 2 meetings since the last meeting. One was held on August 25th of 2017, and one was held on October 9th of 2017. So I'll start with the August 25th meeting and give a brief synopsis of that. So the purpose of this meeting is to revise the application process for community colleges who wish to develop speech-language pathology assistant programs, and then and in order to do that, they must be approved by our board. And so we are in the process of revising the application process. So on August 25th of 2017, the tasks that we completed included reviewing the California Code of Regulations that is related to SLPAs. We decided that we needed to create a SLPA program checklist that took those various codes of regulations and put the regulations into a checklist kind of form as far as, yes, that particular regulation was met, or no, that particular regulation was not met in the application process. We reviewed all of the current SLPA approved programs, and just for general information's sake, 6 of those programs are in California, and 1 program is in Oregon. And what we were concerned about was taking a look at what academic courses each of the community colleges required. We also reviewed a form that is on the American Speech Language Hearing Association website, which is a technical proficiency form for speech language pathology assistants. And we also reviewed an application, a prior application that Susan Kidwell from Delta Community College brought in. They applied for approval by our board back in 2001, 2002, and she still had copies of that. So she sent all of that information to us in a PDF form. And so after reviewing all of this information, we decided that what our task was now, what our action plan would be to create a draft of an application review form that incorporated all of the California Code of Regulations in a user-friendly verbiage for both staff to use as well as the applicant to use. So we met again via teleconference on October 1st, and at that point, we did have our checklist. So we reviewed and edited the SLPA program checklist. It was initially created by staff. It was revised by myself, and then it went to our legal counsel for additional revision and approval from the legalese aspect of it. We also obtained the 1996 SLPA guidelines, which were referenced in the California Code of Regulations. And I'll let you know that was a bit of a task trying to find 1996 regulations, but we succeeded. We also reviewed the 2004 ASHA guidelines. The title of the document from 2004 are Guidelines for Training, Use, and Supervision of SLPAs. That particular guideline is not identified in our current regulations, but it would be a useful tool for applicants to take a look at. So we should have that available for applicants if they want to take a look at it. And then there's a more recent document from 2013, and that's entitled the ASHA SLPA Scope of Practice. That particular document is referred to in some regulations that are currently undergoing AOL review, Administrative Office of Law review. So they are referenced in a different regulatory package. That particular document is not really applicable to program applicants, but it is applicable to licensees consisting of SLP supervisors as well as licensed SLPAs. So it's not really applicable to this particular issue, but we do have it referenced. So we've gone through all of that information. The final checklist has been sent to Dee and myself and Susan Kidwell and Christina Jike for review. I should ask Brianne real quickly, has she now submitted that other bit of information to you, or is that in process?
It's in process.
Okay, so we won't talk about that. So what we'd like to recommend to the board is that that we use the now edited checklist for future applicants. And we do have one community college that is interested in applying, so we'll go ahead and use it with that particular applicant. At some point, we do need to update our statutes and our regulation to reference documents more recent than the 1996 document, for example, the 2004 document that discusses curriculum content beyond the professional practice issues, which are really addressed in the 2013 document. So there's not, I don't believe there's anything that needs to be voted on or approved by the board, but this is just informational, I believe. Okay. So does anyone have any questions or comments?
Hysteria.
The next item on the agenda is item number 5, the discussion of possible action regarding approved institution accreditation requirements in California Code of Regulations, section 1399.152. So just to give you a background, this issue came up recently with the new audiology programs coming up through the CSU system. The question has been asked about defining approved institutions. The board approves institutions for audiology institutions for the purposes of audiology programs. So I actually referenced Business and Professions Code 2532.25. These are qualifications for licensure as an audiologist. An applicant seeking licensure as an audiologist shall possess a doctorate in audiology, too much coffee, earned from an educational institution approved by the board. So the board approves institutions as far as for the purposes of the audiology program. The board may in its discretion accept qualifications it deems to be equivalent to a doctoral degree in audiology. The board shall not, however, accept as equivalent qualification graduation from a master's program from the applicant from a master's program that the applicant was enrolled in on or after January 1, 2008. So when we talk about approved institutions, we go to that definition of what that is. If we go to the second page of the memo, I've also referenced the California Code of Regulations 1399.152. And this is where it defines what an approved institution is. Now, the question recently came to us from Doris Gordon, who's the director of the Accreditation Commission for Audiology Education, ACAE. If you look at 1399.152, it talks about what an approved institution is, and it specifically calls out the American Speech Language Hearing Association as being one of those accrediting bodies. So the question was, why is not ACAE referenced? Well, that's because this law was written during a time when I think ASHA was that accrediting body. But the way the language reads, the requirements are an educational institution, or in the case of a joint program, educational institutions, that is accredited by a regional or national accrediting body recognized by the U.S. Department of Education. That's the educational institution. And has program accreditation in the area for which licensure is sought by an accrediting body recognized by the United States Department of Education or the Council on Higher Education Accreditation, or its predecessor, the Council on Post-Secondary Accreditation, or a comparable accrediting body recognized by the board. So to address Doris Gordon's letter, where she actually asked the board to respond to the question was basically, does ACAE meet the accreditation requirements identified in CCR 1399.152? And she actually provided a letter from the Council for Higher Education Accreditation. As you can see, they do meet those qualifications, and I wanted to just make sure that everyone understands that, and to see if there are any other questions about that issue. Make sure that we can clear up any confusion on that.
I think what you, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think what you put together is very good. I think it might be helpful to them, maybe make them a little less nervous if we could develop some sort of correspondence that actually put these statutes, on paper for them and explain it to them a little bit more. I'm happy to work with you to help develop such a thing, and I think they would be much calmer about the whole thing. My second comment is, I know that getting regulations changed is just a very difficult thing to do, but I'd love to see ASHA removed from that language. I wouldn't necessarily say that we need to have an ACA listed. I just think we should take all of those kinds of professional organizations out there, because it's no longer, I don't know if it was correct back then, but ASHA doesn't do the accrediting. It's the Council on Academic Accreditation that does, so it's already an error. But it would be just nice if we could remove any of those names from our regulations. So I would like to, even if it's painfully long, like to support a move to do that.
I second that. I think it is important that we recognize the bodies that accredit institutions or accredit educational programs that may or may not be linked to a private, voluntary organization that people can choose to join or not join. And I think this is an especially fraught situation in audiology, and particularly at a time when we have a shortage of audiologists in California. We want to pave the way as smoothly as we can, preferably with gold, to make sure that we have audiologists come into California, stay in California.
So what would it take to do that, if we really wanted to make a move to remove that language?
Well, I think we've identified two things. One is a motion to respond to ACAE, and just to clarify that they meet the qualifications according to the regulation that we've described. The second is for the board to develop language that would clarify these requirements and possibly update it and eliminate any redundant references.
Yes, I agree that there's two things to do here.
So we can make a motion, I think, we can separate them or we can do them together. So maybe we'll do two separate motions.
Do you want me to? Okay. I'd like to move that we provide ACAE with a letter that is assuring them by noting our statutes that they are indeed an agency whose accrediting will be recognized in California.
I second that motion.
It's
Oh, I'm sorry, comment. We need to know if there's comment from the board. Comment from the public.
I was about to ask.
I'm sorry.
Are there any comments from the members of the board?
Last time you asked me to help you.
It's already turned.
Oh, it's already turned on.
So I think the most important piece of the second motion is that it needs to be a very neutral statement. And that's really about the most important, so it needs to be neutral.
Okay, and I think we're still talking about the first one. the
We're
motion
talking
of the-
about
There's a
first
motion
one.
on the table
Oh.
for the first motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any comments from the public related to this motion? Now, we'll call for the vote.
Aye. She just called for a vote.
We have to do a roll call vote.
That's what I just did. I just said, this is Allison. I vote aye.
We did it.
Yeah, we did. We did. I vote aye.
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 Aye. Yeah, the motion has passed. Now you want to do the second one?
So long as it's okay, Paul and I can work on this, is that part of the motion?
No, you can delegate.
Yeah, we can work on this together. I think that's clear.
Okay. So, secondly, looking at California Code of Regulations 1399.152, I would like to propose a motion that any reference to the American Speech Language Hearing Association be removed from, it looks like, number C and D, so that we are remaining neutral and that we do not reflect a relationship or regard needing confirmation or guidance from any sort of professional organization.
So just to clarify what the motion is, that staff provide proposed updated language that would clarify these requirements, remove any redundancies and references to professional organizations, right? And remain, so that the regulations reflect neutrality.
Yes.
Okay.
Said it so much better.
And then we have to go through the whole rulemaking process.
It's okay. That's what we're here for.
Good.
That's what you're here for.
And I'm okay with that. I just want to make sure that everyone's clear, because sometimes we make we propose something in a meeting and it's approved and people think it's become law. We decree it. So we know we have to go through that whole process.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any comments from members of the board?
Again, I would like to commend Marcia for having the nerve to bring this up and really be committed to seeing this through. It's past time. So thank you very much. Okay, me too.
I have a question about what your remarks. You said to remove redundancy. I thought we were removing ASHA, right? But it's just because we have a redundancy, or we move it together?
I think it's redundant to point out what the qualifications are of an accredited body and then reference one particular accrediting body when you're not referencing them all. So if we find any redundancies or any updating needed, this would be a good time to do that.
Okay, but the main spirit of the motion is to remove these names from the law, right, of this institution that we don't.
I think the main spirit is really, in my mind, it's twofold. One is to remove reference to a private voluntary organization. And the second is to identify only one private voluntary organization and not all private voluntary organizations.
Who is the one you are identifying?
American Academy of Audiology. So I think the idea here is to talk about the rules and regulations and laws that apply in the state of California that are not necessarily governed by or beholden to a private voluntary organization.
And the American Academy of Audiology, it's not a private voluntary?
It is a private voluntary. So I'm saying in the same spirit that we're seeking to remove reference to ASHA, we would remove references to the Academy, but I don't think those references are even in regulation. But if the idea is that we're only looking to the laws and regulations of the state of California, not beholden to a private voluntary national organization.
Dennis?
Are you ready?
I think we might still have comments from board members. Do you have a comment, Patty, on this particular issue?
No, as long as
Oh.
it's neutral.
Okay.
Okay. Dennis?
So, Paul, I like very much the way you rephrased Marcia's, because it would be less challenging. I'm sorry?
Fine.
What were you trying?
I'm trying to give you a microphone.
I got one right here, and I think I was spilling over to it. I'm not sure. So the idea is that you want it to be neutral, and you don't want to create a reflex against it. So I think I very much like the way that you put that, is that we don't need these references to these other organizations. Here is the purpose. So I appreciated that, as opposed to say, let's cut the head off ASHA, which was sort of the
Was I saying that?
no, but that's the way they may interpret it. Oh, you're removing ASHA.
No, I meant to say that.
I know. Good for you. But you know the reactions that you would get, and yours is more neutral, and yet has the same effect in the long run of eliminating that name or the name of any other organization.
And just to add to that, also what you said was a very practical way to approach the motion, and, actually how to implement this, which was, much more useful.
Any more discussion? Do you want to repeat the motion?
I will let you repeat the motion, Paul.
We'll go back to the recording and listen to the first and the second, make sure that they're the same. But I think the motion was to delegate to staff to come back with proposed updated language for the board's approval to update California Code of Regulations 1399.152 and remove any redundancies, update the language, and make the language neutral. And obviously the purpose is to not make any special references to any, I think as Allison called them, voluntary private organizations. We have a motion and a second.
Let's vote.
I vote aye.
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 I could introduce it, I think. Okay, we're moving on to item number 6, and that's a discussion and possible action regarding communications with the California Children's Services. We're on item number 6, and I want to make sure that everyone understands this is a continuation of previous conversations, discussions that the board has had, and I think we just wanted to continue to follow up with this topic. It's been a very challenging thing for the board to establish this communication, but I know that we have people that are willing to help us out, so we wanted to try to tackle some of these issues that we have identified in our previous background documents. And I don't know if Allison or Marcia,
I could give a short update.
you probably have something to say to it. So we'll start with Allison.
This is probably a topic that's going to be on our board discussion list for the next 20 years, just as it has been for the last 20 years. The update that I can provide right now is that the individual who was appointed to be the overseer of audiology services at the statewide level, unfortunately has now left that position.
Is this recent?
Oh yeah, this is Amy, the one who was like a rock star. Yeah, and she was really, really helpful. And unfortunately, we learned that she's no longer in that role. She may return on, I'm not quite sure what basis, maybe a part-time or consultative basis. There is a new individual who's been identified, and by we, I mean primarily Margaret Winter at USC, and I have been continuing to be in touch with the powers that be at CCS to try and offer our help in managing, in particular, the cochlear implant program. We're kind of back to where we started. And on that cheery note, Marcia.
Okay, as we referenced before, Allison and Becky had developed a several-page document and actually engaged in some conversations with the leadership of CCS at one point, and thought they were going to make some progress with making some changes that were really important ones, but unfortunately that didn't happen. In the meantime, we were able to speak to Sacramento advocates about possibly setting up communications in some way between the board and Department of Healthcare Services, CCS division, to try to get at some of these issues. And when I forwarded the document that Allison and Becky had written, and they looked over, there were specific resolutions that were suggested, solutions to the biggest problems. And that led to their responding saying, okay, this sounds like we need a statutory change. This one looks like we need to have a conversation with the Department of Healthcare Services, and so on and so on. So that's how they approached it. And they're looking for direction from us in terms of what it is we want their help with, if indeed we even need their help with anything. But they were just, they have this way of getting in to talk to people that we don't seem to be so lucky at. Anyway, so that's what needs to happen is I think a subcommittee should be developed, if we don't have one already, where we can actually tackle what's realistic in this list. There's probably, there are at least 4
recommended solutions. How do we really want to approach those? Do we just want to have a conversation with them? Do we want to develop some regulations? What it is that we want to do? I think we have to nail that down before we can really go forward with this.
Well, and I completely agree with you, Marcia, and I think the frustrating thing is that we don't know who they are, and they is a moving target. So I completely agree with you.
It seems like when I do talk to Sacramento advocates, they're on top of who that is and ever changing, but they seem to know who it is and have these conduits that seem to be potentially helpful to us.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to see how that really works, but we have to do our homework to kind of lay it out. What is it that we really think can happen? What statutes are we talking about that we might be able to change? What regulations and so on? So I think that has to happen first, and maybe revisit this whole document since it's several years old.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it certainly is. Well, and I think maybe a good place to start would be to do, and you and I think could do this pretty easily, is just to do a fairly succinct letter to Sacramento advocates, sort of distilling down, these are our top 5 bullet points, and they've been in existence for 50 years. And then, so at least we can get the big categories laid out, and then if they have a contact at CCS that is actually going to stay there more than 6 months, we might be able to make some progress.
But some of these may require regulatory change that's something that's a board activity and that we don't need their input. We would just like to make those changes. But I am relatively ignorant about how the process would work. I sent this to you, right, and you saw what
Right, do you want to just talk, maybe, do you want to talk
Give an
about them right now
example?
and give us an example?
Okay, so for example, here's a very practical one. It's about the poor reimbursement for ear molds, for example. And we talked about not only do we have to use our materials and our time and our postage and all the things that it takes to make an ear mold for a child.
And also to assume the risk of taking an ear impression on a young child, which is a risky procedure, probably one of the more risky things we do.
Absolutely. And it looks like it really costs us about $100 to do this, and we get paid $27.52. Okay, that's probably in their regulatory package. That's what they're going to pay us. So we want to have invoice plus 60% at least to cover some of those costs. We're not asking for the moon, just to make it realistic. And the Sacramento advocates suggested that we should meet with the department to seek their support for this approach. Would need their buy-in, their understanding of this and their willingness to expend money to do that. Anyway, that's how this runs. There's a whole bunch of other suggestions here. Let's see. One of the problem is right now you have to get an ENT who is paneled by CCS to sign off on the authority to fit the hearing aid. And that just takes forever. First of all, there aren't very many. And then when you have to try to get one to do it, if you don't know them, you have to provide all the history and all that information, lots of back and forth with that office before you can get the go-ahead. One of the solutions is to allow pediatricians in general who don't have to be CCS paneled, but just recognized as pediatricians in whatever area, and allow them to sign off on it, because we work with those individuals much more often. So the thought is that would require a statutory change. So in that case, I don't know who we approach in order to make a change like that. I don't know.
Well, I think we'd have to agree that we want a particular change, and then we'd have to find an author. I know that DCA executive staff has offered themselves at the last meeting to help us with legislative issues like this.
Okay. And there are some recommendations here that we know of a number of state legislators who have hearing loss and who've been sympathetic to our issues before. Kevin Mullen, Phil Tang, and Holly Mitchell. I don't think everybody has hearing loss, but one of them does.
I would say everybody over the age of 55 has a hearing loss, and that's probably most of the members of the legislature.
That's true. So anyway, that's where that stands. We could knock this out, bring it back to the board. These are our points. These are how we think we need to approach it. Whether it's just a conversation, a regulatory change, whatever it is we need to do and talk about it at the next meeting, but a little more coherently.
I think that's a great idea to take the letter that, or the document that, my gosh, that must now be 5 years old.
At least.
And go through and identify, I think things that will take, that have budgetary implications for the Department of Healthcare Services are probably dead on arrival. Things that can be, easily changed through regulatory change that don't cost any money. That might be low-hanging fruit. I just feel like, Sisyphus with pushing the boulder up the hill.
I understand why you feel that way, but I just feel like we better jump in, even if it's painful, or we're never going to get anywhere.
Right, I agree. I think if we have something that we can look at, we just looked at a regulation that has been in existence for a long time, and we got the ball rolling by directing staff to come back to the board to take action on that regulation. I think in this same vein, if we have legislation that we need to consider, legislative changes, it starts with a discussion. So if we have something specific, we may want to present that now, talk about it, and direct staff to bring something back, bring some background document and something for the board to consider.
Would it be in the purview of the staff then to look up which regulations this is referring to and bring that and feed that to Allison and I?
Well, I think if there are laws that affect other agencies, like we're talking about the code that is affected by Medi-Cal, I forget if it's chapter something.
Yeah.
You guys know what I'm talking about. If we're talking about that specifically, then that may be a broader discussion. If there's anything in our statute, in our regulations that are on that list that need to be affected, then we could consider that now.
I suspect that's not the case.
Okay.
These are all going to be outer agency issues,
Okay.
Department of Healthcare Services policies and regulations. So in that case, I don't know how you go after some other department other than legislatively. But I need guidance on it.
Well, you said you had a breakdown of some that required regulatory changes and some that required, but the regulatory changes affect someone else's code, and it would be that agency that would have to take the lead on that.
Yeah, so do we have to set up a meeting with them to have a conversation about it?
So, yep.
To see if they're willing to, take whatever steps they need to take to change these things.
One option would be to have an audiology committee meeting, a public meeting, and invite them to that meeting. Another option would be to have that meeting behind the scenes with stakeholders. And I think how many board members? More than two requires a public notice, right? So more than 2 board members requires a public notice. Yes.
It feels, trying to get somebody to come to these meetings might be challenging,
So it might be more practical to go to them with
Yeah.
stakeholders. Okay.
I think. And, there's, the Sacramento advocates didn't say, okay, this is what has to be done here, this is what has to be done to deal with that. They didn't do it that, they just suggested that may be where this has to go. So we're not in I guess we need further direction to support what they're saying or not.
And this is challenging too, because it sounds like we're looking at issues that, Allison has pointed out that some of these are major hurdles, uphill battles, to take on. Perhaps what we want to do is find those things, deal with those issues that we think we can tackle, or issues that we think we can impact, and just kind of look at not low-hanging fruit, but lower-hanging fruit. Try to deal with some of those.
Yeah. On the other hand, I kind of look at it like, well, if we're going to have one stab at this every 20 years, maybe we got to hit them with everything.
Okay.
That's just another way to look at it.
I think that we do have to take some action though, because just noticing it and talking about it and really, bringing it back to the next meeting and talking about it again without action, I think that's a little concerning. I think we need to actually schedule something for, decide that we're going to deal with this at our next meeting, or, hang it up.
I get it. I just think that that we need to distill this document.
Sure.
And actually talk about, I guess the most logical steps to take, you know, distill it down to the most important issues, talk about what logically we can do and how to do it, and then decide whether we want to have a public meeting, or is that the way to handle it, or an in-house discussion with Department of Healthcare Services, is that the way to handle it?
I wonder if we had an audiology practice committee meeting, notice to the public, in Sacramento, because we're not going to get them to come anywhere else. And the last time we met with them, Margaret and I flew at our expense to Sacramento for the specific purpose of meeting with CCS. But if we had a meeting in Sacramento and it was scheduled far enough out that we could hopefully get some representation from Department of Healthcare Services in Sacramento, then if we could all be in the same room, I think that would be tremendously helpful. And Marcia, I think you and I, with Paul's help, could develop an agenda. And if we have to publicly notice it, I think that's fine. In fact, we would really want to have, you know, there are plenty of audiologists in Northern California who are just as concerned about this as, you know, as people in Southern California.
So who makes the
So we can agendize that for our March meeting. We can have an audiology committee meeting. A lot of the players are in Sacramento. I agree with Allison, and we can also.
Are we meeting in February in Sacramento?
Is it February? I'm sorry, February. Thank you. My months are off because we had this meeting in October, so, right?
Right.
Okay. Okay, so February meeting, Sacramento, and, you know, maybe have a conversation with DCA executive staff, see if this is something that they can help us with too. We have new board and bureau deputies that have just started.
So would we invite representatives of the Department of Healthcare Services to attend this? And you think?
Invite is a nice word. Could we compel them? No, of course not. Yeah, but I think with sufficient advance notice, and I think the idea of doing this in Sacramento in February is far enough away that if we can nail down the dates, we can begin to sort of like let people know that we would really like representation. And these are some of our concerns. And Paul and staff, I know you could help us draft a letter to, you know, specific stakeholders at CCS. And assuming that they are still in their positions 3 months from now, they might come.
Do you think we need the help of Sacramento advocates, or with our
I think they're important stakeholders.
Yeah, I think that would be really, I mean, CAA, Sacramento advocates, CASHA, whoever wants to lend a hand, yeah. Please come up.
They use that.
Yes, it works much better.
So on that note, I haven't been sure whether I was supposed to say anything yet. I was waiting. CASHA has an early intervention task force that is less than a year old that is going gangbusters. And when you said pediatricians, the California, is it Academy of Pediatrics or whatever? Yes. So they are involved with them. They're working, this group, the CASHA group is working on a protocol. They're moving forward with a number of things, and bells kept ringing in my head when you were talking. I think that you really should talk to them and see how they can partner with you. I believe they're working with First Five, and there's a part of First Five, a subset of First Five that is called something else that they're working with more closely. So there's a whole list of things they're already doing. This came out of learning how things are done in Finland, believe it or not, where early education, early intervention actually starts in the womb. And so we are taking that and moving forward with it. Deb Swain is the chair of that, and you probably already have her information. So, and we could talk a little bit more, okay?
Thank you. The more help and the more involved, the better. Okay, so
Who's going to work on that?
You want to do it?
Oh, yeah, we will.
Okay.
Do we need a motion to do that, or can we just
Do we?
decide?
I was going to say, do.
I think, I don't think we need a motion for this because this is going to be something that we talk about later on when we formulate our next agenda.
I have a comment.
Ron has a comment.
Regarding the issue you raised with reimbursement for earmuffs, stuff like this, as a medical provider, I know that we're not allowed to charge family above what medical pays us. That's the law. Is CCS services under medical the same rules?
Oh, yeah.
Is it possible that they ask for CCS services only, not as medical, that the provider will be able to ask the family?
No.
Because sometimes what is
And in
best
fact-
for the family, I'll tell you, I'm talking about small reimbursement, I'm not talking about major hearing aids. I'm
It's
talking
not,
about
it's not
equal.
legal. It's
What-
not legal.
What is, huh?
It's not legal. We cannot balance.
No, I know it's
Yeah.
not legal unless we change the rule in the
But
state.
that, I think, would involve changing a Medi-Cal statute or law
Regulation.
regulation, yeah. That would be opening Pandora's box, because it's not just Medi-Cal, it's every healthcare service that Medi-Cal provides.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that
Because
would be,
sometimes,
I think we're chasing a rabbit
sometimes
here.
a family will say, we'll pitch $100, give them all to our baby, and the person will say, I'm not allowed to touch anything.
That's absolutely correct. We are not allowed to take it.
Some of those laws are tied in with federal laws too. Okay. So looking at our agenda, did we have any more comments on CCS? Okay. We have a few options here. One is we can take a break right now, go right into closed session for item number 7, which would be the board meeting in closed session to do the executive officer's evaluation, or we can continue and at least tackle a few more of these agenda items. Is there a preference from the board?
Are you kind of anxious to get this over with?
I am neutral.
It's up to the chair.
Why don't we stick with the agenda as it is?
Okay, then we could probably take a break right now and go into closed session.
So we're going to take a break. We'll go into closed session. We'll figure out where.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's no way around there.
Okay.
Where'd you guys get one? We're going back into open session. And Paul, are we going to move to your executive officer's report?
Yes, a couple of things to note is we gave you an item 12 memo to put into your binders. And we're going to go out of order and go to item number 14, the executive officer report. Give everyone a chance to get there. Not a whole lot to report, but I do want to, the last time we spoke, we had 2 vacancies and 1 vacancy on the way. One of those vacancies was for our receptionist position or our administrative assistant position. This is a primary contact person for the board at the front counter and on the phones. So we recently hired a young man by the name of Brian Irwin, who is already doing a really nice job, nice person to talk to on the phone, and very professional when he greets our customers. We also have Katrina Martinez, who was hired to fill our new licensing analyst position. So as you recall, we were approved by the Department of Finance to augment our staffing and to add someone in licensing. We got the position, and then we had some more turnover, so we've always had 2 licensing analysts. Now, for the first time ever, we have 3 licensing analysts that are dedicated to speech-language pathology and audiology. We have another licensing analyst that handles hearing aid dispensers. That hasn't changed. but this person will help us not only with the processing of speech, language pathology, and audiology applications, but they're also going to help us with conducting CE audits and just good cross-training among the 3 analysts. That also means that if we ever have a vacancy, we're down to 2 people, which we've always run on 2 cylinders, so it's kind of a nice thing to have, but it's what we need. Yes? Pardon?
So, do we need to use microphone or not use microphone?
I think you just have to speak up. There's a multi-directional
Oh,
microphone.
great. So we're going to start up the CE audits again.
Yes, we are.
And when is the anticipated date for that?
First off, we're training the new person right now, and one of the strategies to train the new person is we actually have her sitting in the front, so she's kind of getting a well-rounded knowledge of board operations. She's also going through the training and learning licensing applications. I would also add that I think she's doing a great job, but ultimately the idea is to cross-train all 3 of them in different areas, and Brianne probably has more on timeframes.
I'm actually meeting with them next week to kind of look at our CE audit procedures and fine tune them. We are in our slow season now, so this is a prime time to start doing the audit.
So maybe in the next 6 months or so you'll start doing
Oh, gosh,
them, or-
yes.
Oh, okay, all right.
We do have some work procedures, but it's been a while, and we just want to, I want all of my licensing staff to get together and let's develop the process and work out the strategy.
Yeah, from what I know, for some time, the board hasn't had a formal, the board has done audits, but it hasn't had a formal structured process or a goal-driven process where we say we're gonna audit this % of our licensees. So I think that's another area that we need to determine what is an appropriate amount. There are quality assurance principles out there that are proven, that are well-known. We'll probably look at some of those things. We'll look at what other best practices are out there.
I think I'm remembering from maybe some time ago that the target number was 5% of licensees per year. I don't think I'm making that up, although I could be.
Yeah, what I was pointing out is there's no statute or there's no regulatory requirement. Boards have done 5%, they've done 3%. There's different things out there, but we could look at what is being done today and make sure that we don't take on more than what we can handle and prioritize. Obviously, licensing people is important, but we also want to ensure that people are complying with CE requirements. Brian, did you have something else?
The last audit we did for the board, we did 3% just because we wanted to start off small because we hadn't done an audit in so many years.
Right.
What area of auditing are we talking about?
We're talking about continuing education requirements.
So I think when you done 3%, right? If you done it, how many years? You've done it. For how long have you done it?
It was about 3 years ago.
3 years ago is when we conducted.
3 years ago, you started with 3%. Now,
We did a 3% audit, but we haven't done one since then.
oh, okay, because I think you will be able to learn if you do 1% or 2 or 3 or 4. If how much out of your audit there's no violation, then probably you don't have to increase it.
Right.
If you do 3% year after year and all 3%, 100% compliance that you've done, then the situation is okay. So you can continue with 3. You don't have to go more than this. If you find from 3% that 50% of these people are not in compliance, then it's a problem that we have to deal with.
Right, and
I don't know what. When you've done this audit, what's the status of?
Most of them are in compliance. Very little.
I do know that, and we reported that in our sunset review document, and I believe it was in the 88% of compliance ballpark. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was in that range. I think that's a good point you make. Those are good indicators, and those are the kind of things we would look into, because we know that some boards have already implemented this. I'm not saying we haven't done them, because we have done continuing education audits. I think we used to have a staff person that was dedicated to that some years ago. We just haven't had that for some time. So that's something that we're going to be able to do now. I just wanted to announce that. As you know, we lost Anita Joseph, and that was an area that we were really looking hard for someone that was qualified. We were fortunate to have interviewed several qualified candidates. We had a very good candidate pool for the enforcement coordinator position, and we were able to hire someone who actually is working as an investigator with the Division of Investigation. She's highly qualified, and we're confident that she's going to be able to really help us and keep that continuum of, good services and solid investigations and good enforcement practices with the board, which is why we're here for consumer protection. So we want to keep that going. Something that we have talked about in the past few years is our board office structure, and based on, I know I'm kind of preaching the choir, so I know we've talked about this quite a bit, but I want to just let you know where we are. We have an increasing licensing population. We're well over 25,000 now. I think we're nearing 25,000. We've actually charted our growth. Some areas have grown more than others. We anticipate continued growth. We know that we had a real spike in the slipper population a few years back. Speech language pathologists continue to grow, but overall our board has grown. I think we have some numbers here behind 14D, where you can see that in 2012-13, our licensing population was 18,000.
No, D.
I'm sorry, it's C. Today our licensing population is 28,942. Now, that number is accurate, but in comparison to the numbers prior to 2015, it is somewhat inflated because we're counting things differently. But the numbers are still growing, and in some areas have increased by 30% in just a few years. So we can't continue to provide a normal level of service, whatever normal is, with the continued increasing population. So our focus in the board for the last few years has been to make sure that we have a solid structure, a solid fiscal structure, and make sure that we are able to increase our staff to adequate levels so that we can support the work that we need to do. We were successful on one hand in getting a permanent position. That was a huge hurdle for us, and we have that person. We've accomplished that. We've also looked at other ways of using our resources. I think one of the best statements that Allison made at the Sunset Review Committee was about how we manage our practical exam, and basically really put it out there in a way that I think everybody understood that we are kind of band-aiding this together, using overtime resources, borrowing staff, borrowing, stealing, whatever we can to make things happen, just to do our jobs, just to license people, just to examine people, just to conduct investigations. So that is not acceptable. We need additional staff. We have been working hard for that. We've been advocating for that, and we're in the process. I can't discuss specifics of the budget change proposal because those are considered confidential until they're approved. But I know that you're aware that we're pursuing that, and so far things are still looking pretty good. We're hoping to have additional staff, not this coming fiscal year, but these are for the year 2018-19. I've included in the board items the statistical information. If you look at page 2 of the executive officer report, you can see that under licensing cycle times, that our licensing cycle times have remained steady. Today we are licensing people with complete applications for speech language pathology and audiology in 1 week, and we are current with hearing aid dispensing. Now, I'm happy about that. I don't get as excited about that because now we're kind of going away from our peak season time. But when I look at the whole picture and I look at where we were during our peak, I'm very proud of our staff because things didn't go beyond a month, where there was a time when they were several months out. There was a time when, there was some long wait time. So today,
I'm assuming that 10, 15, 16 should be 10, 15, 17.
Yeah, the last
Yeah,
ones are.
that's correct, and that is
Yeah.
that is my mistake. That is my oversight. So 1 week is where we are today, and
amazing.
the staff are doing a great job. So
That's
I'm really proud. That's a huge accomplishment on their part. Our licensing staff and Brianne in helping us with that. I've included the enforcement.
I want to mention that we met our performance-based budget targets.
Oh, thank you.
It's a huge accomplishment.
As you can see, the person who keeps track of these performance-based budget targets, we have budget-based targets that are mandated through DCA by the governor's office, and they keep track of how we're performing in certain areas. We have licensing application goals and timeframes. I think that a few years ago we frankly would not have been able to meet, but for us we've exceeded those. So we met all of our budget-based goals this year. So congratulations to our staff; they're doing a great job. Enforcement. I want to give special thanks to Marty Schaefer, one of our enforcement analysts who has stepped up and helped us in the area of enforcement while Anita was gone. She has stayed on top of those cases for us and made sure that we have open communications with the Attorney General's office, the different offices and the different staff, and she's helped me stay on top of that. I've listed the disciplinary actions, all the disciplinary actions that we have adopted in the past year, and in the next enforcement report you'll start seeing 2017, 2018. I've also included for your information the latest news release on the McDonald Hearing Aid Center's settlements. That's there for your information. This is a investigation that the board, took on for several years and required cooperation from several agencies, including 5 county district attorneys' offices, the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation, and the California Attorney General's Office, the people that came and presented to us at our last board meeting. DAG liaison is Megan O'Carroll, and we want to extend our appreciation for them in helping us get to closure with these cases. One of the most important aspects of this, the completion of this investigation, was that restitution was provided to victims, and there were many victims in these cases, and we were successful in getting restitution for them.
Paul, I heard this unsettling rumor that the wife of Mark Moore.
If there's something.
Oh, sorry. Can
that's
I
okay.
not
If there's
talk
something
about it?
specific,
Oh.
we could. Anyone that has any specific enforcement complaints or issues that are brought up, especially as board members, make sure that you direct them to board staff. A lot of times people, they know that you are ultimately the directors of the board, so they come to you as authorities and want to tell you what's happening out there, especially when there are enforcement issues, and we appreciate that. But we want to make sure that we redirect those complaints to board staff. It's very important that you not be a part of those conversations.
I was going to say something different than that.
Sure. I just want to make
And
sure that everybody knows that, though.
I can't, I don't know if I, it's just that the wife of Mark Moore is the current owner of Bloom, which took over for McDonald. Is that true?
I don't know.
Oh.
Behind 14B, we have an analysis of the...
Could I just interrupt
Sure.
and say, and I mentioned this in your performance review, but I would like again to publicly state that I think this McDonald case was awesome. So thank you, to the board staff, to the fact that this actually came to fruition. It just was thrilling. And I'm also thrilled to hear that people were paid restitution and how wonderful that is, and what
Yeah.
good evidence of the ultimate function of this board is that people actually got their money back.
You're welcome.
It's awesome, yeah. So yay. Thank you.
Any other questions on the areas that we've discussed? Just wanted to point out, behind tab 14B is an analysis of the fund condition. The Department of Consumer Affairs is one of many state agencies that's currently going through a database conversion for its fiscal, I think it's actually called Fiscal, which is an accounting database. And it's actually called Fiscal. We always come up with these catchy names like Breeze and Fiscal. So that's delayed our accounting reports. Any database conversion is a challenge, and this one has been a challenge, so we don't have current budget reports to provide to you. But I want to assure you that we are tracking our budget, and we'll have something for you hopefully by our next meeting. What you do have is an analysis of the fund condition, and I think it's really just important for you to see where we are in what comes in and what is going out in expenditures. Behind tab 14C, you have our statistical information on licenses issued and our licensee population. Behind tab 14E, you have our enforcement statistics. And if you have any questions on any of these statistics, I'd be more than happy to answer them at this time.
You know what I'm going to say, because I say it every meeting. I don't want to disappoint you. It was wonderful to see speech and audiology.
broken eye.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one thing that we did commit to at the last board meeting is at the end of the fiscal year, we'll provide you with these statistics. If that's,
Cool.
that way we could compile them, and it won't be so labor intensive as to have to break it up. I do hope that once we have our new database, maybe that's something that could be automated for us. Just kind of an FYI on that too. Whenever we want data, or we want to conduct our own data analysis, it is a challenge because we have an old legacy database that one of those green screen databases that goes back for a long time. I don't think that's unique to government agencies, and we're trying to work towards a newer system. But what we have to do is we have to go back and we have to ask for a manual, what do we call those, Brianne? Ad hoc reports. And it can be challenging, and sometimes it's hit and miss, but it's a lot of work. And the reason we do that is because we know that data analysis is important. It's important that what we do is based on data. So we're working towards that, and I hope that we'll be able to do these things much more easily in the future.
But if we really want to separate, I think there should be 4 categories. Should be hearing a dispenser, dispensing audiologist, audiologist, and speech. Because I think there is a big difference between dispensing audiologist and regarding complaint and straight audiologist as much as concerned consumer complaints. I believe that there will be more consumer complaints at dispensing audiologists than pure audiologists, just by the nature of what they're doing.
Okay. And what type of information are you trying to glean from having it dissected? So I'm just curious.
Well, I just want to feel good about myself.
Yeah, right.
Look, thank you for the
this goes a history of 100 years old between dispensers and audiologists.
I see.
The argument we made last time was that if we just knew what the problems were, we could provide better information in our didactic classrooms as well as our professional meetings to try to get people to avoid these
As
falls.
usual, my friend Marcia is so much more articulate.
I just read it yesterday. It's the only reason why.
Okay. So the end of the year summaries, the end of the fiscal year summaries would meet that purpose, at least for now. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Very good. And I will expect that at the next board meeting, the same comment. So I think that's all we're going to cover.
Okay.
Any questions on my board report from anyone? Okay. Thank you.
You're done. Oh, we have a directional mic. Are we ready to adjourn until?
We're going to recess. Yes.
Recess, that's right. Ready to recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
So, do you guys have a van that you rented?
We have.
What do you?